today I am in New Haven, Connecticut. So Josh Mosko has kindly invited me up north. So Josh is actually one of the originals from the Rental Journal. I think before the podcast was even a thing, and we're doing written interviews, I think you might have been written interview number 5 or 6. So you're on that special list.
I like the special list.
So welcome on the Rental Journal podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Awesome.
Excited.
So maybe we'll get into Lodgingmove and your background and everything, but maybe we'll start about like how you first got involved in rental, and we'll sort of work our way through here.
Sure.
So how did you first get involved in the equipment rental industry?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've gotten that question before because it's not like you go to school for, I'm going to be in the rental space. But yeah, I grew up working for my family businesses. My dad had a restaurant, and I did that when I was real young, 7, 8 years old, and peeling potatoes, cash register, and I was like, this isn't the best business, really hot in the kitchen. And I was like, my grandfather was in the electrical wholesale business, so I wound up working for him. Started there when I was like 10 years old. And he sat me down. I'll never forget the conversation. He said, you're going to learn every aspect of this business, and one day it'll be yours. And he said, I'm going to pay you $3 an hour. And I was like, this is great. Like $3 an hour is, I was all happy. And then he handed me some supplies to clean the toilets. And
that was your intro.
That was it. That was intro. So, but I always take that message because I did work in inside sales, shipping and receiving, stocking shelves, outside sales. I worked in every aspect of the business, so that held true. And the segue to the rental business was, and this was after I graduated college, I came back to work, and I was going full-time for my master's, and United Rentals was just starting up down the road, and they were doing the Tricentennial show here at Yale, laser light show, and it was right when they were starting their specialty group with the generators, and so they needed a panel, and Yale was my biggest customer at the time, so Yale said, yeah, go see Josh, he'll take care of you. So I built them a panel in the fab shop over the weekend, and the United Rentals guys, a couple of young guys at the time, were like, wow, this, you went above and beyond, you should come work with us. And I was like, interesting, maybe try to get outside of the whole family business and see what's out there. And I was just finishing up my master's, so I was like, yeah, seems like an interesting opportunity. And at the time, like I said, United was the first branch in West Haven, Connecticut here. They were starting their specialty group, and it was all entertainment at the time, so film, concert, TV, special events. And they gave me a pickup truck and generators and cable and said, here, go set up a job, figure it out. And that was kind of my entree into the rental world.
Wow. So what was your first official role? I
was basically kind of operating and set up, and we didn't really have so much defined roles at that time, but I was kind of set up crew / operations, and then went into some different roles in inside sales and outside sales and management. And like I said, we had one branch at the time, and then it went to 25 in a few years, and then it just kept growing from there. And where they sit today, they have almost 300 specialty branches now. So it's really amazing to watch.
Yeah, it's crazy. In Australia, like Coates is the largest, and I think they've got around arguably 1,800 to 2,000 employees, and then United Rentals has 2,000 locations.
Yeah.
Like the scale of the thing just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like it's so big.
Massive. Yeah.
So big. So when you first joined, it would have been a very different organization then.
Yeah, it was always interesting. I always tell different stories because, it was kind of that small, and at the time they were doing all acquisitions. I think they did, and the first couple of years I was there, like 200 acquisitions. I mean, it was crazy, but it was just different. There wasn't metrics and different things. We would go out to the yard, and if it was empty, it was like, thumbs up, we're doing a good job. And so it was really interesting, and my first real lesson in that was, again, we were doing entertainment. We were doing a lot of stuff in the summer in the Hamptons and New York City and film, Paramount. And we were working crazy hours and taking all sorts of jobs, and we're like, this is cool, we're killing it, and getting all this revenue. And then at the end of the month, we'd look and we're like, we didn't make that much money. And we look at all our costs and union drivers and all these things, and we're like, we need to do something a little different here, raise prices, do some different things. And that was my first lesson on it, how to start to think about it from a rental perspective and managing costs and, metrics and things like that. So yeah, it was a really great learning lesson. Kind of got thrown to the wolves initially, and you really learned, right? And you learned, again, every aspect of the business. And so it was an amazing experience.
So then, how much of a career did you have through United then? It sounds like you were there for a bit.
Yeah, I was there for 6 years, and then I went to a Kohler distributor selling generators. So I got into kind of the manufacturing side and a little bit of rental there, but I was there for a little bit. And the same guy who recruited me at United Rentals went to work at the time Hertz, and he said, "Yeah, we're going to scale up this energy services group. Come over here with me." So I was kind of missed the rental thing, and I hopped back onto into the full rental, big rental company business, and they were not just starting at Hertz Energy, but it was relatively small, and they wanted to scale up, and that was really another exciting opportunity, and that was a great ride.
So was that also in Connecticut?
So initially there was a branch here right down the road in North Haven. It was kind of the New England branch. So I started out as kind of a branch manager for New England, and then I became kind of in a regional role, and then we kind of brought on this as like pump and power for a little while, and then I was kind of over the Americas, and then the last few years went into a global role when we started expanding and doing some things there. So it was just an amazing experience from getting to a global role. I was doing initially, again, we were starting kind of from scratch, everything, right? Sales, operations, a little bit of fleet, a little bit of finance, a little bit of marketing, and just kind of expanded from there, and worked a little bit at corporate in New Jersey. I used to commute to corporate. So it was a great learning experience. I had some great bosses, and it was really interesting interacting with the corporate side on the Hertz Rent-A-Car side, and yeah, there's just some great things about that whole run that we had, and it grew pretty substantially, 40-50% for 5 years, kind of straight. So
wow.
Yeah.
So when was the moment that you realized that you were sort of hooked in the rental industry, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was just one of those things early on. I mean, when I started at United, it was 2000, and right away, shortly after, basically 9/11 happened here, and it was just a different world, right? And we sent 21 truckloads day one there. So the whole emergency response thing, and then I was working for United. We went down to Katrina, and we were living in an RV for weeks at a time. And so I think it was, there wasn't a specific time that comes to mind, but there was definitely a lot of times where it felt like, we were really, coming together in humanity and community and rental, kind of the whole rental team and certain things. So it definitely was that, along with, during other natural disasters and things where, people really needed power, people needed HVAC, people needed equipment, right? So it was really kind of that multitasking and just kind of the chaotic nature of the business. And I think a lot of rental people can understand that. Every day is different and exciting and challenging at the same time. So I think, a lot of things combined just felt like home. And that's really probably my best answer on that.
And so then did you, after the Hertz side, did you continue in the industry?
Yeah. Yep. I went to Ready Arc, which is the largest welder rental company in the world. And that was really interesting, kind of getting out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I took a role as VP of Fleet and Operations there globally. We had about 70 branches globally. And, a large part of it, obviously, is the welder rental part of it. And they had generators and some light towers and stuff. And bought a oil field division that does generators and natural gas generators and things along those lines. So that was a really interesting experience. And that was really, I was on the senior management team and going through some change, in a company called Air Liquide, a large French company, had bought Airgas, who was our parent company. So that was really kind of my first entree into M&A and and getting acquired and that type of thing. So, but that was a really interesting role as well, and learned a lot. And all my previous experience kind of got me ready for that and all the different roles. So yeah, that was a.
And then how did that transition eventually happen to LogiMove? Because working in the industry and then working more on the technology side.
Yeah. I had one other stop there. I worked for High Power Himawinsa, a manufacturer. So I went back to manufacturing. So this kind of rounded out where I was with rental companies and a dealer and then manufacturing, and it was a really great experience working with a company and Spanish company and really trying to scale up in North America, build a new factory, and eventually they were acquired by the Japanese, Yanmar, and so that was a really interesting opportunity. And I was VP of sales there, managing and helping grow in sales. So, and then obviously working back with all the rental companies and all the companies that I worked for and built relationships in the past. So again, all kind of intertwined with,
that relationship. The network is a big play. So when you move around, obviously you've got that huge network that you've built up over those years.
Yeah. And I think, my whole thing too was always, I didn't really know. I just always liked to build relationships and network. It wasn't something that intentional, but I think throughout my career, especially the last few years, I learned that, those relationships are, worth a lot. I like to try to add value and do what I can, but ultimately it's, it's a community, right? It's a small niche industry and everyone knows everyone. And it sounds like a cliche a little bit, but not to burn bridges. But I think in this industry, it rings pretty true.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to that first statement around United Rentals, you going above and beyond, like people will remember that stuff.
Yeah.
So when they think, oh, I need someone that I can depend on, like if you've got that relationship and that network, then you're sort of always in the back of their mind when they need something.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And I think it still is it's a service relationship business where if you really show up for customers, and I think that goes a long way. I think people really appreciate that. And it's still that really tight relationship business, and
Yeah, and so then we jump over to LogiMove. So maybe let's start off with what is LogiMove, because people are probably thinking this strange name fits into the picture. So what is LogiMove?
Yeah, and I'll take a little segue there, because once I left High Power, I went into consulting. I had a consulting company, but I was like, this is my chance to kind of get out there a little bit and use my experience and see where I can add value. And so that was part of the journey and transition. And I really veered into technology, and telematics was really, and IoT was really kind of where it started going. It wasn't really that I created the path that I said I'm going here, but that's where it wound up going. I was in Hertz. I was part of the steering committee for implement telematics, and I kind of headed that at ReadyArc. So I had a little bit of technology experience, and I was part of an ERP changeover committee and certain things. So I had a little bit of background, but that's really where the consulting went. I went to telematics and went into technology and some different things. And I met the founder of Lodgingmove, Philip, through a mutual friend. And again, I was doing telematics, and in my mind, everyone is focused on machine data, and rightfully so in this environment that, machines are very capital intense business, and knowing, data and all that has always been kind of paramount. And I saw the technology with LogiMove, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting technology on the kind of the workforce side and mobility side. And I had implemented some stuff for ReadyArc and on operations side and inventory management and a little bit of workforce and scanning and different things. And I was like, wow, if this technology was there, I would have definitely used it. And I thought this is something that the industry could really use. And, and my thought and my vision was that, okay, we can take the machine data, all the telematic stuff, and actually trigger actionable, with the workforce, because a lot of times people are getting all the data, acquiring all this data, but not really making it actionable or doing anything with it that's added value, just a lot of noise and a lot of data. So this was kind of, where where me and Philip really jived and thought, wow, could be an interesting opportunity because the industry is kind of far behind in this mobility and technology and a lot of outdated software. So anyways, those were our initial conversations, and we saw eye to eye. And the company LogiMove is initially CheckMobile in Europe. A little story there too, but when the founder Philip came over to the US and said CheckMobile, everyone thought it was like paychecks and cash and checks, and like, nah, that's not it. So he thought it made sense to change the name to LogiMove. So the parent company and the initial company is CheckMobile in Europe, and LogiMove in North America. So that's kind of how things led up to that relationship. And I consulted for a little bit, and then he said I needed somebody to run the business basically. So I became the managing director, and that's how I got into the software business, right?
Yeah. So maybe let's dive a little bit deeper on the layers for LogiMove, because people are listening to this and they're probably they're trying to understand what the actual problems are that LogiMove are solving. So you mentioned the mobile piece, and you mentioned workflows as well. Mm-hmm. So I think LogiMove has quite a unique position in the rental industry because it's quite flexible in the way it can design things. So what are some of the aspects of LogiMove that sort of exist right now in terms of products, I guess?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's a good question, because that is a big, who are we, what do we do, how do we add value type of thing. And, I think it starts with, like you said, the flexibility. So it's a low code, no code platform, right? So, what that means really is you don't need to be a software developer or engineer to write code or hard code the software. So it was built basically to be very flexible and really scalable, right? So you can basically click and drop and drag and do some things if you have a little bit of savvy. So basically that's the framework, and it's a multi-tenant, multilingual platform. So coming from Europe and a lot of different countries, a lot of different languages, the need to be was the flexibility. So and the early customers were all car rental customers. So all the big car rental companies, Hertz and Europe Car and Six, were initial customers. And kind of the use case, and I think this helps explain it a little bit, is when you're checking out vehicles, a lot of times there's a high turnover rate in that business, and some of the less paid workers in that business. So they were looking for something at the time, and this is going back 15 years ago. They were looking at something at the time that was basically very intuitive, where you can have a mobile device, a tablet, a phone, and it could guide the worker through the process, right? To which steps to take, which pictures to take, to click here if there's damage, all these things. So that was the initial kind of use case, and what was built from a software standpoint. And then one of the gentlemen that worked for a big car rental company went over to Zeppelin Caterpillar in Europe, the biggest cat rental dealer basically in Europe, and I think the world. And they said, can you build the same thing? So that's what transitioned into kind of construction equipment and and that. So that was kind of the journey. And then the product is definitely kind of formed in different ways for use cases. Initially, it was kind of the whole check-in, check-out, which is really important in the kind of the operations and the flow and the life cycle of the equipment. And then it's veered into damage detection, having an app to control the phone and take pictures and compare pictures on how it left versus how it came back. It's veered into dispatch, to be able to dispatch workforce for work orders and services, as well as dispatching equipment and orders and different things. So it's gotten a lot more robust in as far as integrating with ERP systems, and then kind of taking that into the field, right, from a mobile standpoint. So, for example, I'll give one more example that I think resonates with people. One of the big rental companies that's on one of the big software platforms said, we want this curbside pickup solution. But our current system capability is to take a PDF of the contract and use DocuSign and have a customer sign it. So they said, what we really like to do is take an order off the web, a reservation basically, and turn it into an order in the field, be able to add equipment, delete equipment, change price, take a credit card, change the status of the equipment, and do an inspection. So, we looked at that and said, that's really exactly kind of what we do. And we were able to build that solution in a week, basically.
Wow.
And, so that's the power of the solution is, there's a lot kind of out of the box. And then if you do need to kind of customize and tailor, then it's very, very easy to do from the standpoint of working with the customers, having a workshop, and figuring out, what do I want this screen to look like? How do I want this box to look like, a drop down? What are the verbiage in there? And then right away you can go and test it in the field and then come back and maybe tweak it a little more. But so that's really the high level view of kind of what the solution is, kind of use case a little bit, and the power of the solution.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. 1 week. That's people spend years trying to develop like custom applications. So then that basically means that each customer can have their own flavor of the app as well. Then,
yeah, and it's interesting. We talk about that because even in the car rental space, initially everyone's like, a return of a car should be the same pretty much for everyone, but everyone's like, I got a little different way of doing it, and maybe my way is better, whatever it is. But you can offer that, here's 90%, kind of here's a template, and if you want to tweak it, we can do that in a workshop basically and kind of roll it out, right? And even for a lot of companies that have different geographies that may be slightly different, right, on how they do things, or different DOT or different regulations. So, I think that customization is pretty key, and I think a lot of customers really see that value, right, because their business doesn't always fit into a specific shoebox, right?
Yeah, and so that example with the curbside pickup, customer comes to you and says, "This is the problem we have. Can you help design a solution?" Are their teams building that no code, low code, or is it your team? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, another great question. Initially the thought was that this whole platform would be used and the customers can use it themselves. We can show them a little bit and they can kind of create their own workflows, and it has that capability. But what's transpired mostly is that they've asked us to do it, right? They either don't have the resources or capacity or whatever it is, but it's transitioning to that. But we're starting to see a little bit more now where part of the pitch is that we could provide this solution, and if they have an IT department or some savvy folks, they can take some ownership of it. So we're starting to see a little bit more of that, and some of the big software companies have kind of coined this citizen developer approach, is what they call it. So I think future state, you're going to see a lot more of that. I think some of the big software companies are attuned to that with this low code, no code, and the growth is there. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, and it's an opportunity, right, to kind of really take it internally and make it your own, and do some developments from that standpoint. So that's
because I guess every rental business wants to digitize their process. Like that's like one of the key. COVID has accelerated that whole process exponentially, but a lot of the ERP providers are struggling to provide like custom solutions for everyone, and they're trying to build on iOS or Android. So like what is your, like, is it on Android or iOS? Like what's it built on?
Yeah, it's on both. Initially actually started off on Microsoft Windows way back when, but nobody uses that. So
that got cut off, didn't it?
Yeah. So iOS and Android for both. So and it's and like you said, it's managing all those things and upgrades of phones and iOS 15.2 and all those things. So there's a whole another piece, right, that some people are managing MDM and all the tablets and phones and all those things. So we've gotten pretty attuned to that, right, with working with some big enterprise customers, that there's a lot of moving parts with kind of the hardware side of it, right?
So talking about enterprise customers, so one of our early podcasts was with Doug Doherty from Cooper Equipment Rentals. So I believe that they actually use your solution as well up in Canada. So could you talk about maybe the problem that they were trying to solve and like sort of where you fit into that picture for them?
Yeah, I think, for them it was really interesting, and they're, I'd say one of the really forward-thinking companies, right, with digitalization and really kind of moving in that direction. So they've put a lot of resources towards that, and really for them it was, combination of things, but they really wanted to get this, check-in, check-out part of it, kind of the whole flow of streamlining the operation side of it. So initially it was, kind of that whole check-in, check-out process, and then it just really expanded from there, and we're integrated into their ERP system, and really working closely with them on what are some of the next projects basically that involve different aspects of their business. But they've been a great customer, and it's been a really good relationship, and I see that's how a lot of these things go with digital transformation. I always use this kind of crawl, walk, run approach, because I think the challenging thing is with a lot of companies, if you try to run too fast or boil the ocean all at once, the adoption, it becomes a challenge, right? Because if you don't really have the right product, or it's not really rolled out the right way, I think there's a perception for a lot of folks in the industry where some new technology, and it's not going to really work for the business, and all these things. So I think that implementation part is really critical in the success.
Yeah, I want to cover that a bit deeper. So rolling out technology within any business it can be a challenge just from the change management standpoint. Especially if people have been very comfortable in doing things on pieces of paper, they feel safe. They can write down the asset number, or they can take a photo on their phone and upload it later on. So they feel safe, but when they put a tablet or a phone in front of them, they need to work with it, and it might be a little bit of pushback. So
Sure.
You would have implemented some pretty large enterprise customers and some small businesses. So what advice would you give to rental companies that are looking to try and digitize their workflow process?
Yeah, I think that crawl, walk, run approach it reverts to that in a way where, okay, let's figure out, focus on a couple things, right, initially, and where we can move the needle, and where's the real pain points in the business. So I think we talk about that a lot, and really figure out who are the kind of champions and stakeholders, and make sure you have the right team in place, as well as I think it's really important that they have some kind of ownership of it, right? Somebody who's leading the project and kind of owns it, and has a focus on it, right? I think it becomes a challenge when you have companies involved in certain initiatives where they're spending 10% of their time on this initiative, and they got 10 other initiatives going on, and and that focus isn't really there. So I think it's a combination of things, but I think with experience and rolling things out and understanding the business, I think we try to really rein it in a little bit to say, let's focus on these couple things. And then I think it's like anything else with software and technology and digitalization, is that you start to gain a little bit of credibility, and I think it opens it up to growing and doing some things. And I think the other one last thing is just how do you quantify progress, how do you quantify savings, ROI, whatever it is. So I think there's some things there too with whether it's damage detection or inventory management, that you can start to quantify and say, okay, with this new inventory app, it used to take an hour and a half to do inventory at this branch. Now it takes 19 minutes, right? And we can obviously calculate labor savings and certain things. So I think there's a good mix of how do you measure, and how do you adopt and take it in phases.
Yeah, a couple of things on there as well. I think when you're rolling it out into multiple locations, you need to have the branch managers working towards that common goal as well. And so I think a great way to do that is to add it as part of their KPI, to say 85% of your transactions need to be digitized in the month. Yep. And if they're not, then you sort of miss one of your objectives for the year or whatever it might be. If you don't include that, then there's no reason for them to do it.
Yep.
So is that something that you've seen as well, people using that as objectives?
So yeah, on the branch thing, I think that's super important. That's a really good point, because again, one of my experiences in the past was with inventory management, and when we looked at somebody using a device, we could measure every time somebody does a click, where they're at, all those things. So you can see adoption is a percentage of users, branches, really scorecard it and use it as a KPI. Maybe use it as a scorecard for, branch of the year, different things. So I think that measuring piece is huge, right? It has some accountability as well as standardization. So I think, again, when you have multiple branches, multiple regions, everyone does it slightly different. But if you can start to benchmark and standardize, then I think obviously it becomes easier to measure. But I think it gives that consistent experience too for the customer. And then for new hires and workforce training, it really kind of levels out the playing field a bit. So I think that's a huge piece of it, is to really be able to standardize across the board, and then it's scalable too, right? So I think there's a lot of pieces within that, but I think, yeah, it's really benchmarking and scorecarding and having accountability to really dial it in to see who's using it, how they're using it, why they're using it, all those things. And if they're not using it, maybe it's a training exercise. Maybe they need some training. Maybe they're just not comfortable with the technology, whatever it is. But yeah, I think that's a huge insight to be able to see that data. And that's a big step.
And I think if people are struggling with adoption, it's almost an education piece around what the life cycle is of a piece of paper within an organization. So if someone says it's much easier for me to handwrite it and just put it on someone else's desk, so oh yeah, you just made your job maybe a little bit easier and you feel safe with your pen, but you just added like 3 days worth of work or delay, might invoice a week later, or we might want to miss the damage collection or whatever it might be.
Sure.
It's about making sure that the people in the organization are aware of the ramifications of what a paper trail does within a business as well.
Right. Yeah, totally. And being able to look back on certain things and having that history and that database, I think, is really interesting. And I think you're seeing that a lot in the industry as well. I call it kind of the Carfax of the equipment industry, where you can look at equipment, you can see when it was serviced and repairs and all these different check-in, check-outs and all these different things. So now you have full visibility of the fleet. So you have the telematics data, and you have this mobility, and you have your ERP system. So I think, what we just touched on briefly, I think, is this whole ecosystem is kind of where things are going, right? It's how do you take all these tools and integrate and really add value and make it efficient, right? So I don't think there's one magic bullet to say the LogiMove solution, we get that, and we got everything under control and streamline the business. I think it's, there's some of these different pieces where if you can integrate them well and really share the data, then I think that's when you really kind of add the value.
Yeah, and I think you touched on as well earlier, which is an important point, is that there's so many bits of the operations that you can digitize. You can digitize creating quotes, you can do returns, contract creation, servicing, inspections, whatever it might be. You don't have to digitize everything all at once. And you mentioned that it's important to just try and solve one problem first, and then once the adoption is good, then you can sort of expand out. Is that something that really makes a big difference with these rollouts?
Yeah, no, I think that's really it. And you can focus on whether it's, you obviously have you're talking about quotations and pricing and all things. I mean, that's obviously on the sales side. So you can start to focus in on whether it's fleet or operations, service, whatever it is, and really dial it in with those groups and those stakeholders, right? And you get some people that are kind of experts within the company and getting some voice of the customer and feedback. So yeah, I think it's ultimately really kind of channeling that, and like you said, everything has kind of ramifications for other things. So it's really taking and perfecting one piece and then kind of building blocks, right? And making it modular and really getting it out there into the real world.
And then you mentioned that it's important to have like an advocate on the rental business itself. So someone that's like owning the project. Who's the best person normally within an organization to do that, do you think?
Yeah, I think it could vary a little bit, and that's what we've seen, right? I think some of the big rental companies have really started to do this with, somebody who's really this, I don't want to call it a project manager, but in a way that's part of the role where they're kind of owning that project. And they have a team that works with them, and it may involve kind of this operations team, and maybe they have IT involved in some of it. A lot of the customers that we have weekly calls. So sometimes it's kind of all hands on deck, where it's IT and operations, and sometimes it's just operations or sometimes IT. But I think for us, a lot of it has been on the operations side, because I think that's where we can really help and move the needle. And then obviously working with IT folks for data integration and things along that line. So yeah, I think it can be slightly different depending on the size of the customer. But I think, having somebody that's really involved and that has that focus and has some juice within the organization to make it happen is important as well.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of independents that listen to the podcast as well. So I'm a small business. I've only got a couple million revenue, got a very small team, but I want to digitize my processes. Like, what do I do then?
Yeah, I think, and that's been a very large growing segment. I think, one of the things that we've done in our minds is we really want to serve that independent rental company and take all the learnings from the large enterprise customers and really boil it down and make it really work well for small independents and mid-sized independents and those regional players. So we've taken that kind of template and library of inspections and check-in, check-outs and all those things and really have something that's out of the box, right? That really, here it is, you can go use it. Here's videos, here's some things. We'll do our workshops and all those things. But I think it's pretty similar in the way of, what are the pain points, right? And some of the small independents may be operating on spreadsheets, right? And that's fine. And, we could take that and we could mock it up and take their environment and basically host it on a digital platform. So I think it's always about kind of where you're at today and where do you want to go, and then develop those steps in the way. But, we offer something that's kind of out of the box, and then we talk about it. How do we want to, tweak this, tweak that? So that's really where the product has gone as well, to really have something that's for, the small, medium, and large customer. And I think that's the power of kind of the low code, no code, and I think that's where it's going, right? That you can develop an app that, can be used for all sizes and shapes of companies.
Yeah. And then, so you've mentioned the word workflow quite a lot. So what does workflow actually mean within LogiMove?
Yep. So, workflow kind of from two standpoints. Workflow from kind of that software side of things is basically, we call like an app builder. So it's a flow that's kind of created and goes back to that drag and drop. You build it, whether it's an asset flow, there's different types of flows, and then you're basically creating that flow that basically becomes a specific workflow within that company. So if it's the check-in process, if it's a delivery process, if it's a return process, inspection. So every process, we call process, is a workflow. And, the return could be the same as the delivery, could be slightly different, whatever it is. So you kind of generate these workflows. And sometimes initially it's customers have their own, right? They have, their whole check-in process. They have it on paper, partly digital, whatever it is. And we take that and we recreate it. And, one addition of that, I guess that's worth mentioning, is that I think one of the interesting points that everyone finds is with a lot of rental companies, there's a lot of checklists and certain things. And I think a lot of times the quality of data isn't, where you'd want it to be, right? It's a checklist and it's, is it working? Is it starting? So these questions are really built around kind of yes, no, and a quick checklist. And, while that's good to have something, I think you get into the mode of what we call pencil whipping a little bit, where it's just like, yeah, check. Where we start to talk to the customer and say, maybe would it be helpful if we asked it in a different way? Like, let's say they're checking out a pump and you're testing a pump. Does it have pressure? Yes or no? That's easy. But maybe you want to know how many PSI it is. Is it 25? Does it fall in the right range where it, working properly? So I think we start to reframe it a little bit where, you make the worker actually answer a question in a way that adds value, right? That, where you get better quality of data. So those are things, within the workflow that we start thinking about. How can we enhance that? Not just taking paper and turn it into digital. I mean, that's, that could be part of it, but really how to enhance kind of the workflow and kind of the process and standardization and all those things.
So let's talk about damage detection. That's a pretty big one when it comes to making sure that you're recouping any costs that are associated with it. So in addition to the damage detection piece, I saw that there was also an overlay of AI within LogiMove as well. So can we just cover that topic for a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, love that topic. I think, just a huge advocate of what I've seen in my experience over the years is it's really a challenge in the industry for this whole damage. We have damage waiver and, all these different things, but, having construction equipment and stuff in tough environments, there's a lot of stuff that could happen to equipment, right? So I think there's a lot of companies out there that do some form of, call it damage detection. And from a LogiMove standpoint, we really have kind of what I call 3 layers. We have your regular inspection and workflow, which is kind of, certain checks for the field worker when equipment comes back, right? Or they're checking it out. And then the second layer we call guided damage detection, which is what I think is a real needle mover for a lot of companies. So basically we have this workflow they can use if they have an existing app or whatever it is, they can use theirs. We also have built ours that really is asset specific. So from a standpoint of if you have a pump, if you have a pickup truck, if you have a generator, it's going to be slightly different, right? You're going to see a pictogram on the screen of that type of equipment. And this is really where the field worker gets guided. So they get a piece of equipment back and basically go through the process. And if there's damage, you can click where there's damage and then other drop downs appear. What part of it is damage? A list comes up. If you say it's, interior of a skid steer, okay, what could be damaged? It could be glass, it could be a knob, it could be, whatever it is, right? So you get this list of potential damages. How severe is it? Does it need to be replaced, assessed? Take a picture of that specific damage. So that's the guided, and that could take you all the way to a cost. We have some customers that even have a cost. So when you dial in that damage, again, a piece of glass on the cab of a skid steer might cost, $300, right? So that's the guided damage detection where it gets very specific on, what the damage is, and then you have that traceability. So you have that whole asset history of this damage occurred on this date from this customer, this user at this time, and all that. So it really gets that transparency and visibility of the damage, and then the third piece is the AI. So what the AI does is basically you're taking pictures on how the equipment left and how it came back, and the AI is looking at those pictures and saying there's additional damage. Like this damage wasn't there on the way out, but it's here now. So it picks it up, and that's the whole use case in itself of, okay, how do you handle that? Is it an alert? Is it a cost? What do you want to accomplish with your business? So we have that with the car rental companies, and we have that now in a big way in construction and equipment rental space. And so those are the 3 different steps. And really what the interesting thing is, I think from my perspective, is that a lot of companies don't even know kind of where they're at with it as far as any metrics, right? So if you ask rental companies and say, what's your damage detection and what's your damage collection, you're probably not going to get an answer because they don't really have that data and they don't really know. So it's really interesting once you establish that benchmark of, what's your percentage of damage detection and damage collection. So yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and we can get into other specifics, but in the car rental sector, it's about $800 per damage, and in the construction and equipment rental space, it's $1,200 to $1,600 a damage is what we're seeing, and we have some big data that it's moving more towards that $1,600 per damage. So it's a huge number when you roll up, especially with bigger companies, different branches. What that number could look like.
Yeah, I could even imagine like if you're incorporating AI and you see repeat damage on the same type of machine, eventually you can start almost like giving advice to say, make sure you check this part of the machine because we've got all this data to back up to say that there is typically some type of issue with it.
Yeah, exactly. From day one, my thought was always, what are the top 5 damages with this type of equipment and that type of equipment? Because I think, when you're building inspections and check, it's all about obviously, getting that 80-20 and figuring out, where should you really focus on, right? Is it the tires? Is it, is it the bucket? Is it, whatever it is, right? So I think that's kind of where eventually it goes, and I think that's where the opportunity is too, right? To really dial it in from that standpoint, working with manufacturers and certain things that, certain things are breaking more, denting more, whatever it is, right? And then you can really take that data and utilize it for your fleet. And we even have some customers that look at the condition of the equipment going out and coming in. Again, in the car rental space, there's a cleaning charge. I think that's a whole nother topic where, there could be some opportunities of getting equipment coming back with, all sorts of cement, overspray, different things where, there's somebody that's got to sit there with a pressure washer or scraper or do something to get that, get that stuff off. So I think anyone who's been in the business realizes that, it's a challenge and it's an opportunity at the same time. Yeah.
And look, so there was some pretty big news recently as well. So LogiMove was acquired. So do you want to just talk through like what the past 6 months have looked like and what's happened recently?
Yeah. So, really exciting time in the company's history. And, it was always about obviously growing and scaling the company, and really initially in Europe and in the Americas. So really exciting time, and working with a private equity company, Banneker, out of the Silicon Valley in California, and great private equity company that's really showing an interest in kind of the rental space and software space, and really looking to scale it up and see an opportunity. So they're putting a lot of horsepower behind it, and they really like the technology, is obviously why we've come together. And they really see these next several years in the industry as an opportunity to really kind of pave the way for technology and digital transformation, and with some of their other companies that they've acquired to really take that and be, one of the premier, if not the premier players globally in kind of this rental software and all things technology space. So
must be really exciting for you as well, like coming in to the company and seeing what it was like in North America and get that slow growth and then start building up, and then today being acquired by a massive private equity firm and that growth. So that must be just an exciting feeling even just for yourself.
Yeah, it's always, when we talked about my story of, I've always loved the growth part of it. I've always liked working with the team and building something and looking back and being proud of it. And I think, that always falls in line with me. And I think that's kind of where it's at. And I think this is really the first chapter. I think, there's just a huge opportunity and upside for the company and in the industry as a whole. So there's some exciting things to come down the pipeline, and I'm just happy and grateful to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll learn a little bit more about Josh as well. So we've been talking about LogiMove quite a bit.
Yep.
So you've obviously worked at some pretty high-profile rental companies in North America, now on the technology space. So who do you think has played a big influence on you from a mentor perspective?
Yeah, I think I've had some really, like I mentioned before, some really great bosses and, really interesting opportunities that I've been presented with. And, it definitely, my big rental company experience has definitely shaped me in a way where I think, not just myself, but the whole industry is come up over the years. I had mentioned, we were talking before the show a little bit about, how we used to, back in the day, kind of measure success. And it was just, there wasn't any metrics. Everything's evolved so much. But, for me, it was really interesting too. I think, through the years, and I look at Hertz as an example, I had a few bosses there who were really keen on kind of personal and professional development. So for me, it was really my first entree into, okay, how do I make myself kind of a, better employee? How do I make myself a better person? How do I take some of my experience and help others? And part of it was, being involved with mentorship programs and leadership programs and taking classes and all those things. So it really hit home for me that, this is obviously a job and something I'm passionate about, but, I really want to help others and, my experience and kind of, lift other people up. I think that always, resonated with me. So I had some really good bosses that really took that on and gave me some opportunities to, be involved with some of these initiatives and I was fortunate enough to, one of my highlights was being in this global leadership, and I got chosen, from the corporation standpoint to, in this global leadership role. And there was 8 of us on the equipment rental side out of 42,000 employees at Hertz at the time to win the award. They had an award every year, and it was just a great honor and experience to, we had this trip to Italy, and everyone got to take their significant others, and it was like this big celebration, and it was just amazing. The CEO at the time, he had worked for GE in the past, and Jack Welch, who was on the board, and he said, if I ever become CEO, I'm going to do one of these programs. He won like 5 at GE, and he's like, if I ever have the opportunity, it's something I'd like to do within the corporation. So it was just such an honor, and all those little things just kind of resonated with me, and I've always kind of taken that and try to implement it where I can, and all my experience of never, being out in the field and doing all aspects of the business. It always goes back to that from my upbringing and my family, that the same way, like I never ask somebody to do something that I haven't done. So I've had a lot of great mentors and learning lessons over the years, and it's been, the industry has been really good to me, and I just love it.
Yeah, awesome. And so if you could give advice to young Josh, what would you say?
Young Josh. Yeah, I would say that, I think one of the things that I've learned, especially getting out of the corporate side and going to consultant and software, is that don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone, right? I think, the industry is really great, and I think a lot of times a lot of people feel stuck in a way where it's the only thing I know and I can't really kind of move out of it. And I've seen it from all different angles, right? Big companies, small companies, dealers, manufacturers, rental companies. And for me, it's just really about rounding out yourself as a person in your career. So I think for me, it was just, don't have expectations, just enjoy the process, enjoy the journey. And it's been great. And that being out of your comfort zone, taking on initiatives, and really establishing relationships. I think that whole networking piece, we always talk about how small knit the industry is, but it's really, just carved out some really good friendships and relationships that are lifelong, right? As a lot of us travel all over the place, you start to develop it where every city you go to, you're calling up your buddy, and, it's just, it's irreplaceable. And so I guess from a young Josh standpoint, this is where I was meant to be exactly today, the podcast with you, and I'm just grateful for this whole journey that led up to today.
Yeah, awesome. And so you mentioned success earlier, but like obviously over the years, success would have changed in terms of how you defined it. But how do you define success today?
Yeah, success for me personally.
Yeah,
I think for me it's really happiness, and and what I'm doing is really paramount. It sounds very cliche and kind of out of the box answer type of thing, but I think I really look at that as important, right? Obviously all of us have lives outside of work and all these things, and we really devote a lot of energy and passion towards this industry and the business. But I think for me it's just been really interesting. And I remember we were in one of the global leadership meetings we had a lot of keynote speakers and come in, and I remember some of the keynote speakers talking about life balance, and obviously you can get into a whole thing about life balance, but one of the things was if you're not healthy yourself, you can't help others. Doesn't matter how successful you are. And they talked a lot about people retiring, spending their whole lives trying to grow the corporate ladder, be an executive, and then retiring and having a bunch of money, and then unfortunately passing away a few years later because they just, all they knew was that grind. And everyone I've ever talked to that's super successful from a standpoint of moving up the ladder or really making money in their career, seems like a lot of people always say, I wish I spent more time with my family or friends or whatever it is, right? So I think success for me, long story short, is really loving what I do, enjoying what I do, helping others, and I like to really grow a business and work with a team. I've always, whether it's in sports or business, I always like that team aspect.
Yeah, no, it's very nice. Yeah, it's if you don't look after yourself, like you can have all the money in the world, but it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. In the end.
And I think we've really learned that the last few years, right? I mean, it's our health and everything, and going through what we've gone through the last few years is really a challenge for a lot of people, right? It's changed, reframed the way we do business, the way we interact, and all those things. So, yeah, never taking things for granted, I guess, as well, right?
That's it. All right, Josh. Well, thank you for coming on the Rental Journal podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Love it.
Cool.